There will be more information about Adobe Camera Raw coming up. We haven't quite got to that yet at this point in Chapter 1. However, I did want to just point this out because there is a missing section from the DP Best Flow video series where it'll be helpful to know what it's talking about if you are getting in depth onto that website. So I wanted to point this out. I apologize for a properties panel floating here. I can't seem to get rid of that. There we go. Okay. Anyhow, what it's asking or what it's trying to talk about on that website and the missing video would show is just how to set your settings to assign a profile when you're opening a RAW file through Camera Raw. So I have this RAW file that I shot, and do whatever editing you need to do in your RAW processor. And then down at the bottom, before you open this up, you really kind of only have to do this once. Click on that little link. It looks like a link down at the bottom. It's going to show some workflow options that have to do with how things come in from Camera Raw into Photoshop. So first off, take a look. We have some presets we can choose. If you want to make a new one, that's the only way something will be there. If you haven't made one yet, then there won't be any. I'm on a different computer than usual, so here we go. I've got nothing. We'll start from scratch. We can choose our color space here. Really, this is going to be dependent on what type of a workflow you're going to be doing. If you're working with video, for example, you're creating video, frames of photos that are going to go into a video, then you might use one of these, Rec 709 or something. Unlikely for anything in this class. If you're going to be doing printing on your own desktop Epson printer, for example, then you might use like an Epson or some other custom profile that you have. But most people are going to be using one of these standard profiles up at the top up here. Adobe RGB, ProPhoto, or sRGB. Those are the most common ones. sRGB is for screens, like we've talked about before in other videos. I would not use that as a working space. sRGB is a delivery space, meaning when you're finished working on something, when your work is complete, when you're going to save it out to actually publish online or in an app or something else, that's when you would convert to sRGB. You want your working space to be large. You want the gamut to be large so that you have lots of options for color conversions and more aggressive color editing than you would in a smaller space. So Adobe RGB is the next one up from there. ProPhoto is the largest of the options here. It's unnecessarily large for a lot of things, but if you're working with raw files that have lots of color information in them, then it doesn't make sense to throw it away at this point in your workflow when you're just getting started. So I'm going to go ahead and keep mine on ProPhoto RGB, but Adobe RGB is going to be fine for a lot of things too. Again, just depending on your workflow. So I'll use that. I'm going to keep the bit depth at 16 because, again, why throw away information in your file when you haven't even brought it into Photoshop yet? So go ahead and leave that. Image sizing, I don't want to resize it at this point. That's only for output when we're going to start resizing. I don't need to sharpen it any here. I can sharpen later in my workflow. Again, all these other things, these are things that you're going to want to do later on in the workflow. However, open as a smart object is going to be helpful to do. So if we check that box, then that's going to let us come back into Camera Raw and make whatever edits we want to using the Camera Raw tool non-destructively, and it's going to remember all the settings that we have in here, so we're not starting over from scratch. It's a less destructive workflow. Actually, it's completely non-destructive, so definitely check that box. We'll hit OK. It'll take a second when we open this object, but then we can down here at the bottom right drop down that option here. We can say open as copy, open as object, or just open. So we have the other options still, just what it's going to default to. If you ever want to get out or change or get some alternate options, press the Alt button on the keyboard, Alt or Option on a Mac, and cancel will turn into a reset button. But I'm just going to press Open Object. That brings it into Photoshop. Take a second to load. And now we can confirm down at the bottom, we've got ProPhoto RGB. We can go up to Edit, Convert to Profile, and it'll say it there. Adobe RGB is the one we can convert it to because that happens to be my working space for Photoshop. But the current profile that it's in, because I chose that opening from Camera Raw just now, is ProPhoto. So I'm going to cancel that. I don't want to convert it right now. But we can do whatever there. One last little tidbit. This isn't really the topic of the video, but if you want to check it out, go to View, Proof Setup, and click on Custom. What this lets you do is see what effect color changes or color profile changes would have on your image without actually making them. It's just like a filter over the top of your image while you're working in Photoshop, so you can see how it looks. Drop this down and we can say, what device do we want to simulate? Do we want to simulate something? I'm going to go Extreme Go Newsprint here. And if we turn this on and off, I'm really not seeing much difference. It looks like I don't have any colors that are out of gamut. Simulate paper color. There we go. Newspaper is terrible paper, so we're going to see a big difference actually printing on newspaper. The color shouldn't shift, but the color of that grayish newspaper, that'll make a big difference. But this proof condition, we didn't actually change any of the color in the digital file. My image is still intact and everything. It's just a temporary preview that we can turn on and off with a keyboard shortcut, Control-Y, or uncheck that box. Okay, and so Control-Y, turn it back on. As we're working, let's say that this is something that's going to be printed for whatever random reason in a newspaper. I can edit with that preview turned on and see how it's going to look. And I can say, you know what, this stuff looks like trash. I really need to add some more contrast to the bottom half of this image in the building structure to get that to show up better on newspaper. That's the topic for a different video, how to do that. But hopefully this helps give a little information.